Working part-time as a mum is a scam. Here are 5 reasons why and how you can avoid falling into the same traps that I did. Hi, I'm Isa2. I'm a mum of 2 girls. I live and work in London and I'm currently on my second maternity leave. Now, obviously I have to caveat this by saying it depends on your individual circumstances, your employer, your support system, sector that you work in. And of course, I'm aware that due to our absolutely astronomical childcare costs here in the UK, going back to work at all after having children isn't even an option, and it's not a choice necessarily for everyone. But I want to specifically talk to anyone who might be in a similar situation to I was and is considering whether or not to go back full or part-time after having a child. Number 1, the workload doesn't change. Now, again, obviously this depends on your individual circumstances, your employer and your own setup. But for me personally, when I was in a previous job and I went down from working 5 days to 3 days, my employer didn't hire someone to do the other 2 days. So I was still doing the same workload, but now just in 3 days. And I also want to say that I had really great employers, right? They were really kind, they were really empathetic, they were really, accommodating. But the reality was there was just stuff that needed to get done. The working week was still continuing, even if I wasn't there on those other days. I was still checking emails and messages because I felt like I wanted to get ahead, because when I was in on those 3 days, it was really tricky to keep on top of everything. And that's something that ultimately I found really stressful, because on those days when I wasn't working, I was with my child and they were a toddler. So I was running around after them, but I was still trying to often do emails on my phone. Sometimes I was taking little calls and I just felt like I wasn't doing either role well. And of course, I was earning less money. So I was doing the same work that I was doing before, but now I'd almost halved my salary. 2, the needs of your child change. Now, this may sound obvious, but we can only know what we know, right? So when we're often making the decision to go back to work full or part-time after maternity leave, we're basing it on the knowledge that we have as a parent. And if it's our first child, all we know is what they're like under the age of 1. Well, at least that's what it was for me. So I made the decision to go back part-time when my child was 1. Now, she was a late walker, which at the time I was stressed about, but now I'm like, that was a blessing. So when she was 1, it's hard work and challenging, but she could kind of tag along with me a little bit more. But as soon as she started walking, everything changed. Once they become a toddler, it's less meet up with your friends, have a chat over a cafe and give them a few toys to sit and play with. It needs to be soft plays, playgrounds. They need to burn off energy, run around. So physically, it becomes a lot more demanding. And then of course, mentally, they're just getting more and more skills and adventurous constantly, so you're needing to set up activities, think of how to keep them entertained, and it just becomes more and more exhausting. Not to mention the fact that then they don't nap, right? I've got a 4-month-old at the moment. She naps 3 times a day. That is not the case once they become 2, 3. This isn't to say that that's not incredibly rewarding, and that the days off with my daughter, of course, I had some amazing times and made some amazing memories, but it's just something to be aware of. Number 3, it can be more lonely than maternity leave. Now, again, this depends on your own individual circumstances. You might live really close to family, you might have an amazing support network around you. But for me, I found that once I went part-time, I just felt more lonely. I found that it was really a lot easier to make friends in my maternity leave. I joined a natal group, so I made an amazing group of mum friends there. But once we went back to work, a lot of them went back full-time, or if they went back part-time, their days off weren't necessarily the same days off that mine were. It was also a lot harder to make new friendships. I found it easier to strike up a conversation with another parent in a cafe when both our babies were like asleep in a buggy than it was when I was running around after a toddler in a soft play. It's just harder to make those kind of connections. And so I just found that I was more lonely and isolated than I had anticipated, because I sort of thought it was going to be a bit like maternity leave, and it wasn't. Number 4, future maternity pay. Now, I know this is one that you can't strictly plan, right? Because life be lifing. We might want to have loads of children, but that's not necessarily how it's going to play out. But all I would say is that if you do have an inkling that you may want future children, just think really carefully about whether now is the right time to go part-time. Because obviously if you make a formal arrangement to go part-time, your salary is going to have decreased, and that is obviously going to be reflected in any future maternity pay. So it's just something to be aware of, thinking about your future finances. Number 5 is the pension gap, which is similar to the last point. We're all talking so much more about the pension gap now. We're all so much more aware, which is amazing. But just in case you don't know, when women come to retirement age, they tend to have a much smaller pension pot than men do, because women tend to be the ones that typically take the time out of work to raise children. And obviously when we take the time out, we're not contributing to our pension in the same way that we would be if we were working full time. Now, obviously this happens in maternity, but of course, if you then go part time, there's going to be less that's going to be contributed to the pension as well. Now, I think there are ways to mitigate absolutely every one of these points. So if you found this video useful, drop me a like or a comment, and I'll make a part 2 with my tips as to how to set yourself up for success. Now, I'd really be interested to hear from people who have gone part-time and it's really worked for them. What are the systems that you've put in place? What are the great flexible working options that are out there for parents? You know, obviously I feel like we need more, but I want to hear from the people that have really cracked it. I'm going to tag a couple of accounts that I found really useful that have some really great resources for working parents. But yeah, essentially that's why I think